Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
I was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna leave at the end of the month, so it'll be about
Stage left, right?
right. Yeah, like it's gonna be the end of summer, and so that'll work for me, and so like the end of August, like I'm not gonna be here anymore.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so I'll just start training people so that there'll be a transition. And then a week after that, they announced that they were going to move the company to Tennessee. And
Okay.
and you could keep your job if you wanted to move.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
So I waved them goodbye and wished them well.
Right.
And I had sort of wanted to build a sabbatical for myself anyway. So that was kind of what I was thinking. I did a little bit of traveling that November. I come from a pretty big family, and a lot of my aunts and uncles also have sizable families. So I had a cousin. She and the guy she was married to were stationed in Beijing. They were reporters, and
Okay.
at her sister's wedding, they had invited me out to visit them in Beijing.
There you go.
And I was soon to be unemployed and have a bank account. So
There you go.
I asked if they were serious about that, and they were like, "Of course we are." So yeah, a couple months later, I went to Beijing. There was some adventures with you have to get your passport pre-stamped by a Chinese embassy to go to China.
Really?
Yeah.
You have to go to an embassy in the U.S.?
You have to go to an embassy in the U.S. and apply for an entry visa and hand over your passport.
Wow.
And then come back like a month later, and one of the pages in your passport will be a Chinese entry visa. They just like print right over it.
Wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, did all that. Charlottesville's a couple hours south of Washington, D.C. So
Yeah.
So the Chinese embassy is not a huge lift.
Right.
Yeah, flew over there, came back. Mostly wanted a chance to. So I'm a recreational mathematician and wanted to think about computational math some.
Okay.
So that's sort of what I did for a while there. And while I was doing that, I came up with this different idea about how to do super intelligence alignment.
Okay.
In the modern parlance, I was thinking about how to get consensus on networks. So if you have a network of agents that all have information, how do you construct information that is the composite of their data streams?
Okay.
And it turns out that this approach, when applied to financial markets, actually generates a more powerful model for financial markets than the kind we've been using since the Renaissance. So that kind of became my new purpose in life.
Okay.
So this was like 2013, 2014, somewhere around there.
So how did you discover this? How did you discover that it's a better model for financial services?
Well, so the first step was I worked out that by modeling a consensus problem around a game theory construction known as a coordination game,
Okay.
you could get consensus. So basically, there's certain strategic situations where agents that deviate from the consensus get a worse outcome for themselves than they would have if they complied with the consensus.
Okay.
And the property of those kinds of strategic situations is that once a consensus forms, it sticks around. And before a consensus forms, everybody's trying to get a consensus.
Right.
So that combination of traits struck me as valuable
Okay.
for generating consensuses on networks.
Okay.
And so then the second problem became, if you did this, like, how do you sort of deal with the problem that once a consensus is formed, everyone now just wants a consensus and doesn't want sort of the truth?
Okay.
And so I came up with this sort of betting model where by betting on the general consensus, you could effectively pay the network to agree with you, on the understanding that if the thing that you're getting them to agree to is better for them, then they'll share the wealth back. So if you come up with a better idea and disseminate it and get people to follow it, and it is a better idea, then they'll essentially pay you for that and you'll make money. Whereas if it's a worse idea, then they'll basically share the pain. So if you do that, then you'll have paid people, so at least they don't lose everything that for a novelty.
Right.
But then they can go back to sort of the good answer and ignore you in the future. And
Okay.
since you're now down, you'll be less likely to be able to, come up with bad ideas in the future.
Right.
So structurally speaking, what this allows you to do is price transaction costs. So this gets into economics a little bit, but one of the problems for market economists is that there are non-markets. So one of the assumptions of market economists, and they don't actually think it's an assumption, but it is technically, is that markets are effectively perfect decision-making machines. And so since we have these things that are perfect decision-making machines, why do we make decisions in other ways?
Okay.
So why isn't there a marketplace to choose your wife? Or why is there a CEO of a company? Why isn't there a market doing that? And so on. And there's some pretty hardcore, like, out there economists that claim that there should be markets for things like that. And most people happily enjoy them or ignore them. But the core concept was this idea of transaction costs. And transaction costs aren't just like the fee you pay to your banker to do something.
Right.
Transaction costs are all the costs associated with using a market system. So
Okay.
they're the amount of time it takes you to learn how the interface works, or the
Mhm.
amount of attention you have to use to pay attention to the New York Stock Exchange, or the errors that are induced by you not trading perfectly. So
Mhm.
all of those things are encompassed within the transaction costs. And this
Okay.
is pretty normal in economics, is that cost is a highly encompassing term that doesn't necessarily have a number fixed to it. But
Gotcha.
price, while it can be a highly encompassing term, does have a number fixed to it.
Right.
And so this approach, by controlling that thing, that, the number that you pay to make a change,
Mhm.
and the number that you get back for the values that are attached to those changes and so on,
Right.
those are prices on transaction costs, which is something that doesn't exist anywhere in the literature I'm aware of.
Okay.
So that was a new thing under the sun. So my neighbor, who was actually the guy who'd been assigned to be my mentor at that first company, Boxer Jam.
Mhm.
Um, I was like, well, this is really cool. I just figured out how to price transaction costs. Nobody's ever done that before. And so I walked over to tell him about it. Um, And so we got to talking about it, and he asked me, could you use that to predict the stock market? And I said, no, you can't, because you can't pay enough money. The people in the stock market are making money from their information. In order to get that information for you instead of the marketplace, you'd have to pay them more than the marketplace is paying them, which kind of definitionally defeats the purpose of getting it in the first place.
Right.
Because they're making as much money as the market lets them make.
Right.
Paying more than that amount of money for that information is going to be a losing proposition for you.
Right.
So I was walking back to my house, and I had this sort of intuitive insight that means that the market's paying for information. So there might be a way to make a marketplace out of this by using a recursive system where instead of having one entity, a person probably, asking a network of persons or machines or both or whatever for information, if you could actually sort of wrap it around so that the system was asking itself for its own states, then there could be a market structure buried in there.
Okay.
And mostly as an intellectual exercise, I had a few sort of ancillary thoughts. One is that I also had, I had a little bit of economics, and I knew that everybody knew that markets were perfect. And so if this approach could be close to as good as marketplaces, then that's, when you're close to as good as perfect, that's highly impressive for me anyway.
Right.
But mostly just the concept of wrapping my head around a set of recursive formulas for information value and value information struck me as exactly the kind of reason that I'm a recreational mathematician. So that's what I got to work on for the better part of a year.
Wow.
So that's what I did. And as it turned out, once I'd sort of gotten it nailed down and written code that actually did the computations to sort of check what the throughputs and efficiencies looked like, the system, that's when I discovered the system was superior to existing things, that the amount of work you have to do to get the information is much less, and that it has a lot of other nice properties. It's like intrinsically anti-bubble crash, for example, in ways that the current market structure obviously is not.
Okay.
And so, like I said, that sort of became my new purpose in life, to try to figure out how to get that project into general usage.
Yeah.
And I've tried a bunch of stuff. I had a day job for a little while that looks like probably something that's also going to be hopefully in my near future again, because I'm getting closer to the end of the rope these days. But some of the people that didn't want to move to Tennessee decided to form their own company that makes and leases slot machines to Indian casinos.
Really?
And yes, and they did reasonably well for themselves. So a few years ago, I signed on with them as their data scientist, and got their data team sort of built up. But then things started popping on my side of things, and so I left them. But then things started to really flatten out. There's been a whole crazy thing with the patent office for this, for example. So first rule of patents is that it can't be published.
Right.
So I was kind of very tentative and not talking very much to people, which is a very difficult way to do sales. And
Right. Sort of the antithesis of sales. Yeah.
right, yeah, exactly. Not that sales is really my forte even to this day, and a lot better at it now than I was back then, but still. And sort of looking around for the opportunity, I got a little family money to help me try to get the patent. And so in 2015, I filed a provisional patent just off of like LegalZoom, and you don't have to do a lot of details there, but that starts the clock. You've got 1 year at that point to file your full patent application.
Okay.
And I needed to find an attorney that I could work with for that.
Right.
And I got turned down by several. Lots of people sort of didn't understand what I was talking about, or had conflicts with existing clients, and so wouldn't work with me. And I finally met a guy who didn't have conflicts and didn't understand what I was talking about, but did think that I was probably onto something, and offered to help me look for somebody to
Wow.
to get to. And I got a recommendation, and he checked them out and said they had got a great reputation. So I wound up with a company out of Boston. And we got the patent filed at pretty much the 11th hour.
Yeah.
I think it was about 2 or 3 days before the 1 year would have expired.
Wow.
That we got the full patent application in.
So just over the wire.
Yeah. So we had a couple of back and forths after about a 3-year delay to actually get the patent assigned to an examiner and looked at and so on. But fall of 2019, the patent was accepted. And then, like, patent examiner supervisor called my attorneys and said, we're probably not going to honor that acceptance. Heads up.
Why is
Now,
that?
nobody actually knows, and there's a lot of story about how nobody actually knows. Somebody presumably does know, unless, computers are actually running everything and they're not telling us about it. But
Right.
so that's weird. There's a procedure for withdrawing an acceptance. There's an internal department at the patent office that examines things, and if they don't like them, then they're allowed to say so.
Right.
And they don't deal with you directly. They deal, like, they're a relatively secret department because they're not supposed to be influenced by the outside world. And so, but there's a procedure for them doing that.
Right.
And this is not that procedure. This isn't how it works.
Is it possible they don't understand it?
At that point, it was possible that they don't understand it. But bear in mind, this is the fall going into the winter of 2019, and it's 2024 right now. So there's more to this story that's coming down the pike. So, so my attorneys basically say, let's see what's going to happen. Because they should, you don't want to file for the patent and sort of spend money, and then have them have to give you the money back. Just like, let's have them, there's a procedure, they'll tell us what's wrong, the clock will restart, and we can do this thing.
Right.
And whatever they say is wrong, then we can address it. Okay, fine. So it's getting to December. Now, after they give you an acceptance, a clock starts. If you don't file for the patent before, I think it's 60 days, then that's it. You can't file for that patent anymore. It's public domain now.
Okay.
So we haven't heard anything aside from this informal, hey, heads up, we're probably not going to do our jobs communication.
Yeah, we're not doing
books.
this. Yeah.
Right. So we file for the patent.
Okay.
And that's not a particularly, long, the patent filing, it's not like when you go to get your driver's license and you have to fill out the forms and stuff. This is like when you go to get your driver's license and you've done all of those things, and you give them the money for the piece of plastic that they've got behind the, like this is just the transaction part.
Right.
Except this time, not so much. So a couple of months wind up going by, and then they say, yeah, we're not doing that. We still need to figure out why we're not doing it. We'll get back to you soon.
Yeah, they don't understand. They don't get it.
Right. So that spring, they come up with their list of reasons why this patent isn't going to happen, and most of them are technical. And my lawyers are like, this is all on us. They're not a problem. We can solve all of these. It's just like, we got to move, so we got to like, insert another boilerplate sentence that's purely legal and you don't care about it at all. And we'll just insert those sentences and it'll be fine.
Right.
Fine. Okay. If that's what it is.
Right.
The last one is a 101 violation. So there's basically a handful of reasons why you cannot get a patent.
Okay.
You could not get a patent because something is already patented.
Right. That's similar. Yeah.
Right. You could not get a patent because your patent doesn't actually improve anything.
Yeah. There's no use for it. Yeah.
Right. Or you could not get a patent because it's not legal to patent the thing that you're trying to patent.
Okay.
So the 101 violation is that last one, and that's a heart attack, because if you're in the category of things that aren't allowed to be patented at all,
right,
then
you're dead in the water.
Yeah, there's no conversation to be had.
Yeah.
Now, the reason they say that I'm in the category of not allowing to be patented at all is that they say that this patent doesn't actually improve things. So it's sort of a backhanded later reason that they're sort of pulling up into sort of class one.
Right.
And they don't have a leg to stand on.
Right.
I'm an algorithmic expert. I've been spending at this point a quarter of a century, but at that point only about 20 years studying computational math.
Right.
I know whereof I speak on these topics and subjects.
Yeah, but they don't. They're not getting it.
No.
Right? They don't understand how it applies.
So I go a little nuts and have some very energetic communications with my attorneys, who I also don't feel really understand exactly the magnitude of how egregious the lies that were contained in this thing are to this day.
Right.
But as it happens, there's a classic paper that's actually hosted by a government website that I read back in 2000.
Okay.
That describes precisely how important it is to produce the kinds of algorithmic improvements that I'm talking about producing.
Okay.
And this is back in 1984, I think. This guy got a supercomputer to be defeated on the same task by a home computer.
Really?
Yes. And the supercomputer wasn't using some bizarre, crappy language. It was using the premier supercomputer language of the day, and it was programmed as efficiently as possible within that language for the algorithm being used. And the home computer was not being programmed as efficiently as possible in the language, and it was being programmed in BASIC. But the algorithm being used on the home computer.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.